The course is divided into these small lecture and or demo videos that are meant to be fairly short, anywhere between 5 and 20 minutes long, so that you can zip in and you have a little bit extra time, you can check something out, or it's not hard to find what it is you're looking for, because each of the courses, the videos, has a topic title and a link to it, so you can find what's going on there. Used to be, I did 2-hour lectures. I did a couple of those a week, and that's a lot of material to have to go and scroll. If you couldn't remember where you're at, have to go back and try to find. So it's much easier to find your way around, and it's a little better indexed in that regard. And the general concepts that we're going through are going to be talking about clinical herbalism. We're always going to have a materia medica. That's another word for the herbs that we use. Okay, the medical materia, which is herbalism in this case, which means it's plant medicine, which means it's plants. Basic cellular tissue kind of physiology, but from the eyes or the viewpoint of herbalism. So herbalism-based physiology, and even to some degree herbalism-based anatomy, insofar as it relates to those physiological concepts around the anatomy that we're looking at. Herbal first aid is a big component. That's a big core part of what we do in the school anyway. Formulation, in other words, learning how to put herbs together. We introduce you to that concept. You're not going to get really advanced structures on that yet, but we have obviously advanced courses in that, but it gives you the introduction for it that you need to be able to start doing that and feel comfortable with that. Intake and case management, and by this really, again, just an introduction to the concept of how do you go about figuring out somebody in your family. I mean, maybe this is just for you. In your household, you just want to start using herbs, and you have a child or an elderly parent, somebody who has a problem, has an issue, has a health issue. How do you go about just decoding that and turning it into information that you can use to differentiate what may be going on there in order to be able to come up with the right pathway, a good pathway? There's oftentimes more than one. Usually there's more than one way to, and more than certainly many herbs to work with, but the right pathway to kind of follow in order to be able to get to the source of what's going on. In a very acute situation, the source may just be that by itself, just those symptoms or just those signs. But in a more chronic situation, we may be threading our way down to something that's a little more, a little deeper, and that is more source oriented to what is actually going on. What are the health crises that may be happening, and maybe there may be just a short flare up of a chronic situation that you're dealing with, but we want to get to the source. We're not going to get all of that in a 12-week course, of course, obviously, but I'm going to give you the tools to be able to start your way working into that world. If you like that world and you're really fascinated by it, then the clinical herbalism program would give you the ability to start moving much more deeply into that, to the extent of even being able to do clinical internships and work with our patients coming into our clinic. So that's intake and case management. Wildcrafting and growing herbs, of course, is always a big part of this. Herbalism is such a huge, vast subject. We're talking about, I just finished talking about some clinical stuff that relates very much to what you might be familiar with, especially if you're coming from an orthodox background in medicine. But what about, the herbs themselves, the materia medica, which means there's some botany involved in there as well. What about the understanding of physiology from the standpoint of herbs? And then here we're talking about wildcrafting and growing herbs. We have to identify them in the wild. We have to obviously have the right plant and know what we're doing, know what time of year we would wildcraft that, know a lot about that plant itself, and specifically in that little ecosystem we're in, and how we're affecting that plant in that ecosystem before we just start harvesting, willy-nilly everything we see. And then more importantly to me, as a gardener and as an enthusiast, extremely enthusiastic gardener, I love to grow herbs, and I think that's one of the best ways to really get to know an herb and its full life cycle, and what it looks like, what it smells like, what it tastes like, how it goes through its, from beginning to end, what kind of soil it likes, what kind of temperatures it likes, what kind of sunlight it likes, all those things that go into growing herbs. That's a whole nother part. And I started off, I kind of went on a small, what you might have thought was a tangent. I almost fooled myself because I forgot where I started there. But the tangent being that herbalism has so many components to it, so many of these subcomponents to it, right? And every one of these bullet points is basically that. Now we're down to medicine making, another huge subcomponent. You could literally do nothing but medicine making for an entire career, quote unquote, as an herbalist, and nothing but that. right? It's a science unto itself, and an art and a science. And then running a clinic from home to post-disaster. Of course, when we get into intake and case management, we're talking about clinical herbalism as well. That's the easy stuff. But how do you do it if we're taking it away from that clinical environment, that you don't just have everything laid out for you, and you have to learn how to adapt? And so that's kind of what the running a clinic for our school oftentimes goes towards. We have an outreach organization, which is called Herbal Medics. It's been around for about 12 years now. And we started off doing work down in Nicaragua, and then we worked in Mexico. We've worked all around the US. We basically, the purpose of the outreach organization is to provide herbal and alternative health for off-grid and underserved communities. Not always off-grid, but definitely underserved. This has also included a number of other topics that are very important to the concept of post-disaster, remote, wilderness, and austere medicine, which are things like water purification, not just for an individual, but for an entire community. So I became heavily involved in, and I became part of the school on an off-grid engineering program with slow sand water filtration, for instance. And we've set up slow sand water filtration in the same communities we're doing and hosting these free herbal clinics. Blacksmithing and working with blacksmithing tools. We worked with that as part of that outreach as well, one year, actually twice, but once in Nicaragua, where we were working with the Rama Indians and in a hunter-gatherer tribe, where they use arrowheads and fish spears, and it was highly useful to them to be able to not just to do that, but to learn that and to make sure that their children are able to learn that as well. We have, we've done a lot of teaching in underserved communities as a part of those as well, whether it's just basic nutrition to how do you take in an underserved community, how do you take a $10 budget and in a basically what's a food desert, which a lot of these underserved communities that we've worked in are food deserts, where their grocery store is a glorified convenience store, right? You're not going to find, this isn't a Whole Foods, right? You're not going to find the actual healthy food there. And most people don't grow or have any backyard homesteading going on at all either. Well, how do you take $10, for instance, or $5, whatever, and go into one of those glorified convenience stores and get yourself nutrition that's going to really be the closest thing you can get to real food and nutrition with a limited budget? Those kinds of classes. What are some different herbs we can grow very easily? So the outreach organization loops back into this topic that we're learning here in this course, which is running a clinic. And this will be near the end of the class. This will be week 10 or 11 or 12, somewhere in there, that we'll get into that. But know that this isn't just a topic that is coming to you off of something I just dreamed up or read in a book somewhere. This is experience-based clinic management and running a clinic in underserved arenas, whether again it's post-disaster, we've done a lot of post-disaster assistance, to austere, literally, like when I mentioned the Rama Indian tribe on the east coast of Nicaragua, or off the east coast, middle of the jungle. You're not, aside from boat and foot, there's no other way in there, and you're talking with like a dugout canoe, maybe an entire day. With a motorboat, if you have a motor on there, maybe 2 hours to get in to where they're at. Nearest clinic is not really even much of a clinic. Nearest town is not much of a town, and that's about a day away. So that kind of an environment. How do you do that? How do you pull off running a clinic in something like that? Right. So we've done that. I've done that, and we've led large groups of students working in those areas to do that. So there's a lot that goes into that, and that's a big topic that I like to touch on, because I think it's an important topic that helps you not with just if you're planning, and you may be in this course because you're more interested in preparedness and sustainability for yourself or your family, and that's great. But you might not be. You might be, might be in this because you're starting. You want to maybe be a clinical herbalist somewhere, and you'd be fine with having a clinic in a strip mall somewhere in the middle of a town, or whatever, where there's no issue with post-disaster austere or anything like that. It'll still help you. The things you're going to learn here are still going to very much help you in terms of just planning and organizing and understanding what are the structures that you have to have in any clinic, no matter what your environment may be.